Hello and welcome back to our channel.
Welcome back.
We're back in England.
Back in England, but just as freezing cold nearly as Norway and Sweden.
-5 last night.
If you have not watched us before, you're new to our little channel, then we've just spent 12 weeks in Norway, Sweden and a little bit in Finland seeing the sights. It's been pretty amazing. It's also been flipping cold.
Oh, I thought you were going to say expensive.
It's also well that's all to come. It's been eye-watering as far as the spend, but has it been as bad as we thought? Who knows. In this little video we are going to break down the costs of a 12-week trip into Norway, Sweden, Finland, right up to Nordkapp, and also share with you what we're going to share.
Some top tips to stay safe when you're travelling and find some lovely places to park up, have some amazing activities, but save a little bit of money as well.
There probably won't be a lot of saving money, to be fair.
There'll be a bit, because we learnt a lot as we were travelling.
When we planned the trip, fuel was always going to be one of the biggest expenses. We'd planned for 5,600 miles. The end result was 7,400 miles, so a big underestimate. We filled up 24 times. We averaged 27.4 miles per gallon. Fuel in Sweden and Norway was actually pretty similar to the UK. It's dead easy, loads of petrol stations, you're never that far away from one, so when you're planning, don't worry too much about that. And more often than not, you can pay at the pump rather than having to go into the shop. Paying at the pump was dead easy. There's a button to press for English instructions, and we used a nationwide card, and never once was it rejected. The total cost was a whopping £2,130. Boom. So my top tip is plan to do more miles. You will use the phrase, we're only here once, so let's just do it, and that'll add a few hundred miles on, and then you use that phrase again and again and again, and before you know it, you've done a couple of thousand extra miles. Many of the petrol stations also have facilities for your vehicle, i.e. grey waste and black waste and fresh water. So worth looking out on Park for Night as an example of an app that will help you find them. With bearing in mind as well, with such a long journey, going to need AdBlue. We filled up before we went and had to fill up with AdBlue 2 more times on the journey. Dead easy again. There's more petrol stations with AdBlue on the pump than I've found in the UK. If you couldn't find one on the pump, the stations still sell containers, but it's a bit more expensive. So again, given the amount of miles you're going to do on this kind of trip, if you have a vehicle like me that burns a little bit of oil, then take some oil with you. Mine uses a funny viscosity 0030, which is not just readily available over the counter like some of the more generic ones are. So I took it with me, and probably over that 7,000 miles put about a litre in.
In Scandinavia, Alemansretten is the freedom to roam and camp on any land with the exception of gardens near dwellings or on farmland, and we stayed in some fantastic locations, all for free. In theory, we could have camped for free for the entire trip in Scandinavia, but sometimes we just had to pay because of where we were. Maybe the location or the town didn't have any wild camping, and just being considerate meant that we used airs, paid car parks or Stalplats. Some of these were donations, some it told you they had to pay and it told you how much and how to do it. Some of that was for cash, some you could do on the website. And we also discovered that many of the car parks used Easy Park, which was a really great app to have and is a top tip when travelling around Scandinavia. Using Park for Night, we were able to find all the park-ups we needed with the information about whether they were safe, what was there, and we could decide whether we were being considerate if we stayed there. We also spent 40 nights in different campsites around Scandinavia, and that's because the weather just became so bad that we couldn't have survived without electric hookup. On the whole, the campsites were really well equipped with kitchens, entertainment spaces and barbecue pits, and we spent many nights in the comfort of a campsite. So in total, with campsites, airs, stellplats and car parks, we spent the grand total of £1,073, which works out at £89 a week. And our two top tips for camping in Scandinavia is to go into the local tourist office, because there were lots of fantastic brochures in there, and also look for First Camp, which have campsites in Norway, Sweden and Denmark that are open all year and offer some great facilities out of season at reasonable prices. If you join the First Camp Club, you then get 5% discount on your next visit, and they also have lots of great offers throughout the year.
Driving in Norway and Sweden is really easy. So anyone that's ever worried about taking your van abroad, just don't. It's as easy as driving in the UK, and in fact the further north you go, the better it becomes. The driving standards of other roads users is really good. And I think that's because they get used to driving on the narrow rural roads, they get used to the weather, so they give you plenty of space, they don't push you along, and they're very courteous. So it's actually a pleasure to drive.
That's how the Norwegians do it. Oh my god. It's doing us both.
The road surfaces are all good, with the exception of some of the really gnarly roads that you'd expect if you were going somewhere really rural. We use Google Maps to plan as routes, but then use the sat-nav where we can enter as dimensions in to make sure that we didn't go into anywhere that we shouldn't. When you use Google Maps, bear in mind it thinks you're going to go faster than you really are. So a 3-hour journey, according to Google, is probably going to be more like 4.5 hours. Also, think ahead of where you're going to go, do a little search, and a lot of the rural roads have got webcams scattered along the route. You can log into them and get a live view of the road conditions. So if you're going to be there when the weather is bad and snowy and icy, you can actually get a view of where you're going to go. Also bear in mind that there's a lot of different microclimates as you drive, and in the space of an hour you can have all 4 seasons of weather. You can even be in a situation where the road conditions in one part are different to another part only 100 metres down the road. Because of the time of year that we were going, it was a legal requirement to have all season tyres and snow chains. We've got the all-terrain tyres with the 3 mountain peak symbol. The first part of this journey, legally, we didn't need them, but actually we're glad we had them because the snow arrived quite a few weeks early. It even caught out some of the local Swedish people. So if your journey is on the cusp of the legal requirement to have them, I won't take any chances. I'd have them anyway, and they also have to have 4mm of tread. If you're familiar with France and the priority à droite system, it's the same in Norway and Sweden. So you'll be driving along one of the bigger roads, you'll see a yellow diamond sign with a white border, and that's letting you know that you have priority. Eventually you'll see one with a black line through it, and that's warning you, usually before you go into a small town or a village, that the priority à droite system's in place there. People will just pull right out in front of you because they've got right of way, but just bear that in mind before you start gesticulating at people because they pulled out on you. A surprising thing we found is that a number of cars with no number plates and just a red warning triangle on the back driving at 30 kilometers an hour. And then when you have a closer look, there's a young kid in there. It's just weird. There's a little loophole in the law that's designed to allow 15-year-olds to drive farm vehicles. So a number of companies are set up there where they'll restrict any car and remove the back seats, and it turns it into a vehicle with no number plates that can be driven anywhere at 30 kilometers an hour. That's just 18 miles an hour. Sometimes you will be on a road that's maybe 70 kilometers an hour, come round a bend and you're rearing up on a very slow moving kid.
I think we might need to change that one. Could we rephrase that, do you think?
you can find yourself coming out of a bend, travelling at 50, 60, 70 kilometres an hour and being faced with a kid in a car driving at 18. And before you know it, you're really close to them.
That's a bit more PC, thank you.
Here's a top tip for you. I actually used about 20 litres of screen wash. You know what it's like, especially when it's snowy and there's dirt on road. You're wiping your screen every 2 minutes. So trying to avoid carrying litres and litres of screen wash, which takes up room and takes weight. I got little sachets with a little dissolvable disc of screen wash inside, and I just mend my own up. And that way as well, I can make it more or less concentrated depending on how cold it is.
So our next item is things to do, and there are loads of things to do in Scandinavia.
As long as you don't mind being cold and wet.
Only you can be cold and wet all the time. If you enjoy being in the outdoors, obviously you don't need to spend a penny. There are walks, mountains, lakes, rivers, wildlife. It is an amazing place.
And a lot of the outdoor stuff, the walks and so on, they're all really well signposted. You don't really need maps for a lot of the stuff we did.
And of course, if you look at it, you can see the Northern Lights, which we saw at least a dozen times, and that's for free as well. And there are, of course, lots of things you can spend your money on, and we did go to quite a few museums and activities, but we chose the ones that were unique to Scandinavia and things we'd never seen before or done before. We saw I'm gonna whisper a wish. How much did we spend on activities?
£5,000.
£500, which over 12 weeks for two of us isn't too bad. And of course you can spend as much or as little as you want.
And essential for any trip to Sweden or Norway is the old sausage fork. And that isn't a euphemism.
Ta-da! Also good for marshmallows too. We also spent £400 in cafes and bars, enjoying a little bit of Swedish fika and Norwegian kos, alongside sometimes some very expensive alcohol.
If, like me, you like a cheeky pint, then it is going to affect your wallet. A lot of the costs of booze were absorbed into the supermarket, but realistically, most bars you're going to pay £8 or £9 a pint, which for me, as a tight northerner used to spoons, £3 a pint is a lot of money. But if you're from down south or you're a cockney, then you're probably used to that sort of money anyway. Some of the specialist places though, £22.50 was the most we paid for a bit of a treat in a very special bar.
If you're still watching at this point, thank you very much. We hope you're finding this video interesting if you're planning a trip to Scandinavia. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and if you think it will help somebody else, please like and share.
It doesn't cost to subscribe, but it all goes towards making me a YouTube millionaire.
Making us YouTube millionaires, 2 people.
Mainly me. As of the 21st of November, we hit the criteria to be a monetised YouTube channel. Boom! And 38 pence is the current predicted total that we're going to get from YouTube. Boom. Baby steps. We will of course give you an update later, a completely transparent update on how much gazillions we are going to get from this channel.
By Christmas.
Yes. Maybe not 1 million by Christmas.
Not quite.
But I have done some rough calculations and I think by Christmas YouTube will be paying me £14,650. Update to come.
and it's great to be back in England where shopping is reasonably priced. On the whole, we found the supermarkets in Scandinavia more expensive than the UK, but not really that different to the rest of Europe. In particular, we found fruit and veg and fish really expensive. And obviously buying things that are UK branded cost a bit more too. But we shopped carefully and managed to keep our food shopping bill to £1,360, which works out at £113 a week. Pretty similar to what we normally spend when we're travelling, at around the £100 mark.
For LPG, we use the mylpg.eu app, which never let us down. It was readily available right from Calais until we got to the top of Norway. However, from just shy of Nordkapp, right across the top of Norway into Finland and back down into Sweden, there's no LPG, so we had to plan carefully. Cost wise, a bit more expensive than the UK, but we spent £100. Make sure you take your adapters with you, because on your way up through Belgium you'll use the Acme adapter, and once you get into Sweden and Norway you'll use the dish adapter, same as the ones you use in France. And finally, before we get to the grand total, just a few top tips to finish off. Cash. How much cash do you need to take?
Well, in theory you could get away with not taking any, because Norway and Sweden are very much card dependent, and some of the shops said they didn't take cash at all. However, it's nice to have a bit of coin in your pocket for things like supermarket trolleys, and if you just want to spend a couple of SEK or NOK. We took £150 worth of each currency, but we didn't really use it, and we ended up just blowing it in the supermarket on our last day in each country. How did you find emptying the black waste?
It's horrible. It's minging. It's same as everywhere else. There's just loads of places. We found a couple of machines where you put your cassette in, and one free, one you to pay, and it cleaned it for you. And then the usual Elson points at sites, no problem. But also petrol stations had facilities for that as well. So use Park for Night app, you will find somewhere.
But a lot of the rest areas along the motorways and main roads through Scandinavia all have Elson points, which are a brilliant facility for travellers. We did our laundry mainly at the campsites just because we were there. Sometimes it was free and it was included in the price, and others, like at First Camp, it usually costs between £4 and £5 a wash and a dry. Norway seems to be more expensive.
We also paid £370. That was the return cost of the Channel Tunnel across to Calais, including the dog, and he adds, I don't know, maybe 20 quid each way to the toll.
And we pay for flexi just in case we need to change our plans. We also spent a further £250 on tolls and ferries, the tolls to get across the bridge into Sweden and the ferries in the north of Norway. We saved money on these because before we left the UK we got our Orison Go contract, which gave us discounts on the tolls and ferries, and if you want to find out more details about that you can check out our Getting Ready for the Trip video. And last but not least was getting our lovely dog Buddy on holiday with us. Before we left the UK we got our animal health certificate, which cost us £100. We also had to register him to get him into Sweden, which was free. And before we went into Norway or Finland, we had to visit a vet to get a worming tablet, and that cost £45. And obviously, before we came back to the UK, we had to get him wormed again, which cost us another £50.
Lots of worms.
Well, no worms. That's what he's there for.
Well, that's it. If you've been adding it up as we go along, you should have come to the figure of £6,820. A little bit sick just came up then.
Thereabouts. I'm sure we've forgotten a couple of little bits and pieces.
Which, when you divide by 12, comes to £568 a week. Still, to me, it represents good value. You've been away for 12 weeks. However, if you do a comparison to our last 2 trips, where we would normally spend about £300, so it is true, Scandinavia is expensive.
Well, that's it from us this time. We hope you've enjoyed looking back at our trip and watching what we've got up to.
As always, we thank you for watching. We thank you for the comments, because they really do make our day. Keep watching, keep liking, keep commenting, and if you can, subscribe.